the process generally starts with making a set of different shapes that go with different phonetic parts of speech. This can be really simple. It could be like 3 or 4 or 5 shapes. It could be like 20 or 30, depending on how complicated you want it to be. Just like everything in animation, it's a factor of like how much time and effort you want to put into it, right? But you can get really good results with just a few of these mouth shapes. So as an animation is getting made, the things that need to sync up really, really closely with the visuals, like music and like dialogue, get mapped out on what's called a bar sheet. So this is a little similar to a cue sheet, right? It's a way of marking, in this case, frame by frame, like every single frame. So every one of these little tick marks on here on that top line is one frame. So this lets us map out exactly when a sound is going to happen, exactly when a visual is going to happen, how long it's going to take, so we can really match it up. So this is something that would be important if you're working with the team of folks who are going to be doing different parts of something that needs to be synced with sound. So a few important things that aren't covered in this demo, but that are still really important to this process. Like, we're going to cover just the part of making the mouth shapes move. But there's lots of other stuff that comes along with bringing a character sort of to life, like head movements and body movements. And if you're Italian like me, gesticulation is really important. So we're not covering any of those things. We're also not covering some of the automated tools that can make this process easier in the long run. They take more time to set up, but it makes it easier in the long run. So we'll look at those in later assignments when we're working with more complicated rigging scenarios like you see on the right here. Let's go into After Effects. And I've got a project here. Right now I have 2 compositions. One is a document that you could imagine drawing this out in like Illustrator or Photoshop. And I have layered versions of each one of these mouth shapes, and I've also labeled them with the phonetic sounds that they would correspond to. So we need to do a little bit of work to get all of these mouth shapes into our main scene, which is this other comp called Lip Sync. Right? And so this has a little character with just like a default sort of half smile. And if we play this out, we can see there are subtitles that eventually start. Right? So if I'm scrubbing through, we get subtitles happening. Now, this is great for my demo because it makes it really easy. I don't have to, I already know the pacing of when each letter is happening. If you're just working with an audio track, you very well might not have this. So it might be even a little bit more of a challenge to, parse out like, okay, when is each letter sort of happening, and it takes a lot of listening and looking at the waveform and, playing back. So what we want to do is get all those mouth shapes stacked as individual layers on top of the character's mouth, and then we'll set up some controls to really easily like switch back and forth between the different shapes, to go along with different speech. I'm going to jump back to my other composition here. So let's go to mouth shapes. I want to select all of the vector shapes that are in this composition. So it's all these ones that are in the kind of like sea green color. So I'm just shift clicking all of those in my timeline panel, and I am going to edit copy. And then so I'm just copying the shapes and not the text. Then we're going to take those into a new composition. So let's say composition, new composition. It doesn't matter so much what the size is here, but we want to do some labeling. So I'm going to call this mouth. I'm just going to set this to 1920 by 1080 for now. We'll change that size later. And then I just want to make the duration, like 30 seconds is pretty good. The way that we're going to set this up, we'll have each of these mouth shapes as a 1-second clip in our timeline. So that should give us plenty of room. So I'll go ahead and click OK. I've already copied those shapes in. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control V. Right, so those are all of my mouth shapes. And right now they're all gridded out separate from one another. But what I want to do is actually have each one sitting on top of the other ones, like all in a stack, all over the character's mouth. So I can really easily do that with the Align panel. So under Window, we'll go to Align. Right, so these are my align tools. And I've still got all these shapes selected. I want to align these to the composition. And then I get some controls of where I want them to align. So I want them all to be centered. So align them horizontally. So they're all going to squish down horizontally. And then I also want to align them vertically. Right? So everything is right in the middle. Every layer is, in that stack. So go ahead and click close and zoom back out. So from here, it can help a little bit. It's the mouth shapes are there, but it's hard to see. So I'm going to come down to the bottom of my composition panel. I'm going to toggle this transparency grid, so that will turn off the colored background and make it a little bit easier to understand what's going on. Right? So I can see those are my shapes. From there, I'm going to set a region of interest. So there's another button down below by the grid transparency. So I'm going to select a region of interest, just generically select around those mouth shapes. I'm not being precise here, I'm just making this a little bit smaller so it's easier to work with when we take it into our main composition. So I say I set that region of interest, then under composition I can say crop comp to region of interest. So real similar to like cropping an image in Photoshop, you're cropping out the extra black that we don't really need for this composition. So there we go, got all my layers. And I'm pretty much ready to bring this in, or actually I'm not ready to bring it in yet, but I need to do some work on the layers here. Looks like I accidentally already trimmed these, so I'll just drag them out a little bit longer, right? So we're starting out with layers that are fairly long. What we want is to make each layer 1 second long and to arrange them chronologically so we see one after the other after the other. And that way we can easily jump from one mouth shape to another. So the first thing I want to do is just trim these down to 1 second. So let me adjust my time ruler here. All right, and let's go to 1 second. And usually it depends on the footage and some of the settings that you're using, but I've found that when I want it to cut off right at 1 second, I backtrack 1 frame, and then I can use the keyboard shortcuts to set the out point of that layer. So I'm going to do Option, and it's the right face or the right hand bracket. So I'm holding down Alt or Option on the keyboard and right hand bracket, and that's going to just set the end of each of those layers. And so yeah, that's looking good. So each one is 1 second long. With these still selected, I'm going to go up to the animation menu. Go to Keyframe Assistant and Sequence Layers. This is a super useful strategy for any time you're dealing with frame-by-frame animation. After Effects can automatically spread it out over the timeline in a way that makes sense for what you're trying to do. So I'm going to say Sequence Layers, and I don't want an overlap, so I don't need to worry about any of the options. I'm just going to hit OK. Right, and now I can see those are arranged down the timeline. They're all perfectly back to back. I don't have to do anything. And it looks like I even have some extra space at the end of my comp, so that's awesome. The other thing I want to do is I want a little bit of blank space at the beginning of my sequence. So I am going to just bump everything down by 1 second. And so I just move my playhead to 1 second. These are all still selected, so I'm clicking and dragging, and then I can hold down Shift, and I'll snap right to where that playhead is, so I know it's exactly 1 second. And that spacing is going to be important for the way that we set up, the controls to switch between the different mouth shapes. All right, so we have our mouth sequence, right? And I can scrub through this, and we can get an idea of okay, this is me changing all my different mouth shapes. So we're going to go back to the lip sync layer. So this is where our little character is. We are going to take that mouth composition and we're going to put it in as a layer. So this is one of the coolest and kind of also most annoying parts of working in After Effects is you can sort of nest compositions inside of each other super densely. So I'm going to click and drag this in and just drop it on the top. Right, so it's looking fantastic, as you can see. Right, but we have this as a layer. So this is still linked to the original composition. So if we went back to this mouth layer and changed things, it would still update in this main composition, which is both a good and bad thing, because if you accidentally make changes, sometimes they'll update when you didn't want them to. Let's see. So we got our mouth layer in there. What I need to do now is to size it and place it so that it lines up with the character. Obviously, it's pretty huge, and maybe not placed exactly right. To help me just make that easier, I'm just going to open up the transform properties of this layer. Just bump the opacity down, so something around like 60%. Does not have to be precise. But now I can sort of see where these shapes are going in relationship to my character. I can even zoom in, and maybe I want to scale this down a little bit. And so I'm holding shift as I scale down so it doesn't get squashed or stretched. It keeps its original proportions. So I think something like that is looking pretty good. That seems pretty reasonable. So I'll reset my opacity back to 100%. So now we're going to talk about, okay, how do we actually control this? How do we get this composition with all the different mouth shapes to jump from one place to another? So we're going to do that in like kind of two main steps. So the first thing we're going to do is add an effect onto this composition layer called time remapping. So I'm going to right click on this. Under the contextual menu, I'm looking for time, and I'm going to say enable time remapping. This is a cool and weird effect that is used for lots of different things, but what we're using it for right now is to be able to jump to different parts of this sequence without it sort of interrupting the overall chronology of everything. So we're going to use that in combination with some other controls that will help us just have a really easy sort of like a dial where we can say like, okay, go to mouth shape 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So we are going to add a second effect onto this that we're going to get from the effects panel, which, oh man, this is a small screen. It's here somewhere. There we go. Okay. So we're looking for expression controls. Expressions are amazing in After Effects. So this is a way of bringing in scripting and programming to get effects in your compositions. So hopefully you remember stuff from maybe Foundations Digital Media, or if you took creative coding, this is your place to shine, because we can start to add in some scripting controls that really, really step up your game in terms of what you can do. So I'm looking for this slider control. So that's the last one here. I'm just going to click and drag, drop that onto mouth as well. And then I see in my effect controls panel, I get a name for that. I'm going to call that something more kind of relevant. So I'm going to call this like mouth control. And that'll help me kind of just keep track of like what it's doing. Okay, so we got our two parts of this. We have a time remap and then we have a slider control. I'm going to go back to time remap. We're going to do, we're going to switch how we're controlling time remapping. So by default, it's just going to be like the other properties where you can like click and change the value and set keyframes. We want to control this with an expression. So I can highlight that layer. I can say animation. It was under just under the main animation menu, we can add an expression. So then we're telling After Effects, hey, I want to control this property with a little piece of code instead of like numerically or with keyframes. And so what we're trying to set up here is we want to use a slider control to control the value of the time remap rather than us having to type it in here as a specific time code. We can just say go to number 1, go to number 2, go to number 3. So down here in the dense jungle of all of our settings here, we need to make sure we're looking at this time remap setting. I can see it's got expression controls here. And what I want is to take this is called a pick whip. So this is a feature of the interface in After Effects that allows you to sort of make connections between different parts of your composition. And so this is going to let me connect the time remapping to the slider just by clicking that little pick whip and dragging it up to the slider and just dropping it on there. And now After Effects has automatically generated some code for how this is going to behave. If I wanted to, be a badass, I could go in here and write my own code and do multiple lines of like really, complicated stuff. In this case, all we're saying is the mouth control effect is going to be controlled by the slider. And so now I can just click out of there to get out of sort of expression editing mode. Now I should be able to come to this slider and just drag this to different numbers. All right, so if I say I want to go to mouth shape number 10, I type in 10, I'm at 10. And I think I want to move that up just a teeny bit, something like that. Okay, so that's it. My controls are in. I am ready to start matching this up with dialogue. Whether you take this approach or not, it is really useful to start thinking about more complex compositions and sequences and how those would relate to each other, because that's a big part of working in After Effects is you have these like compositions inside of compositions inside of compositions, and you need to start thinking of it in sort of that structure. So that is not something that we're covering right now. Right, so it's like you could, let me get back to my shapes. Right, these are like the stopping points of each of these phonetic sort of shapes, right? If we wanted to get really hardcore about it, we could be drawing in-betweens for each pair, right? So it's like if I want to go from A to L, what's that going to look like in between, right? If I want to go from ch to O, what's that going to look like in between? So you could add steps. That's partly a matter of sort of preference and aesthetics, also a matter of just hours in the day, because we could spend as much time as we want. This is a thing that will expand to fill the time that we give it. So I'm for, succinctness, and just because I don't think it's all that important, I'm just doing the sort of like hard stop shapes and not really worrying about jumping from one to another. Yes.
You have those like that mouth file?
Yes.
Would that be something we could use if we chose to do this, or would we make our own?
You should probably make your own. I think you definitely use this as a reference. And the thing is too, it's like every character is going to be different. So this doesn't necessarily make sense as like the be-all end-all template of mouth shapes. It really depends on the personality of the character, what their body shape is, like all these different things. Yeah. Okay. So what I want to do now, I want to start. I want to get this to fit my screen. I want to start adding some keyframes to my slider, and that's going to let me, animate the different mouth shapes. What I want to do though is I want to look at both this composition and this other one at the same time. So in my composition panel, I can just right-click anywhere that's like a dead space, not on the canvas, and I can say I want a new viewer. So this lets me bring up multiple compositions side by side. Let's see. So I'm gonna do my animation one on the left. I'm gonna click the little lock icon so I don't accidentally jump to another composition. This one, it looks like it's already locked, and I just want to click the title, and let's jump to mouth shapes. Right, so now I can look at these side by side, and that way I can say like, okay, I'm making an ah sound, I want number 1. I'm making an L sound, I want number 6, etc. And this is where it gets into like the true art of doing this. It can be really persnickety and really tricky because you have to listen and think kind of phonetically, not so much in terms of how things are spelled. So like if we're starting this dialogue here, we're saying what, you're really starting with like an ooh sound, right? Not a woo. So you can get really, really, fine-tuned with it. So it's like I want to start at number 4. Before I do that, let's go. Exactly. Yes. If you're Pak in the Ka and Havid Yad, it's going to be different than someone with super hard R's. So I want to take this slider, and this is what we're going to keyframe. Right. So I don't need to worry about time remapping directly anymore. I can just have that value get piped in from the slider. So I'm going to click the stopwatch with my playhead at the beginning of the track. So that gives me the default kind of like default mouth. I also find it useful when I'm doing this. I'm going to go up to, I want to turn off the layer controls, and I forget if that's under view. Yeah. So under view, I'm going to uncheck show layer controls, and that way I don't get those handles around everything, and it's a little bit easier to sort of understand what I'm affecting. Maybe blow that up a little bit. All right, so I want to come here. Oh, but then I can't see the dialogue. Bummer. There you go. So we're going to start with ooh, which is number 4. So I just come over here, type in 4, and then we're going to go to wah. So we'll go right to 11. What? So we got an ah, look right there. So that's number 1. And then right, so that's number 10. Let's go. What? All right, and you can nitpick this till the cows come home. So I kind of want to like that. And then it's just rinse and repeat and listen carefully and watch back and see what happens. But again, here it's like we're going to say, what is, I'm imagining that this is someone who maybe emphasizes the hard I, so it's going to be more like what is. In that case, I want to start this with not the eh, but the e, which is 9. What is, and then maybe I'll go to number 1 really quickly. So like kind of doing janky in-betweens now that I think about it. And then we'll do an S, which is number 10. What is... and I'm noticing here, in between words, that's something we need to think about too, because it's not like you don't say like t and then hold your mouth like that. You go back to relaxing. So like here, I'll probably take this back to 0. Oh, did I? Right here? Yeah, thank you. That is easy to happen, and that's something that we also need to be paying close attention to as we go through this. I'll talk a little bit about like how to handle these keyframes and how we want them to behave. So yeah, let's just go back to 0, I guess. There might be a better option for this. Now, something's getting messed up here, and I think... Yeah, so this is already showing that I have a little bit of an issue with my keyframes. And if we look at this on the graph editor, we'll be able to see why. So, oh, actually, that's strange. I did not expect to see it like that. So, yeah, I think this might be a side effect of working with the slider. But I want to make sure that these are hold keyframes. So let's jump back to the timeline view. So I'm just going to select all these, right click, and we're going to say toggle hold keyframe. Because what we don't want to happen is to, if we're going from like 5 to 11, we don't want to be at like 5.5, 6.5, 7.5. We want to just jump whole numbers. So I'm right clicking, say toggle hold keyframe, right? And now those should correspond a little bit better and be a little more predictable. And I think I need to rearrange some of these. So just like any keyframing, you have to be pretty persnickety about it. And you may not necessarily have to be doing keyframing every single every single frame, like I am here. Do you all have questions about how I'm doing this or what I'm thinking about? Too many, okay. That's fine. Sometimes it takes a minute to digest. Yeah. What is lip? Oh, yep, okay. That fixes it for now. So obviously, right, there's some, let's just, yeah, I was going to say, let's scale it up. I think that's the easiest thing.
Yeah, probably.
Also the funniest. So obviously we'd want to go through and figure out how we might set that up so that we can go to 0 and not, or that we can, if we have these smaller mouth shapes, that the default smile doesn't show underneath it. So again, that's just like a detail thing that we need to factor in later on. That's the main idea. I know that's a lot of stuff in there in terms of like expressions and nested compositions and linking things together. So I'm happy to talk more about this. I'm happy to look at other demos if this is too intimidating.